Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are by the Mishnah at the bottom of the Chaf Aleph Amud Bet, 13 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, Nisim Ben Miriam. We dedicate our learning to this situation in Los Angeles as people are losing their homes to this unbelievable fire. It should be a hatzlacha. Kadosh Baruch Hu should be merachem on the community, and the fires should cease to be. When you increase the fire of Torah, the Gemara actually says that the reason that you have domestic fires that burn through residential, again, obviously, put this physical hishtadlut and physical reasons aside, the message that it contains certainly is lack of learning Torah at nights, says the Gemara. Rambam Paskins this in Halchot Talmud Torah in Peragima. So it's important as we dedicate our learning to them. The fire of Torah should prevent other physical fires from devastating lives and burning through the communities. Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. This week's learning of the community has been dedicated graciously by the Shea family, Kohen family, and Dayan families. It should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot, be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. Okay, so we march forward discussing the halachot of schach of the sukkah and the walls. The Mishnah tells us, "Hasomech sukkato bekar'eh hamita kshera." If you have your schach leaning on kar'eh hamita, right? Imagine you have the bedposts and the legs of the bed, not just sit on the ground, but also they go up, and you are able to put the schach just laying down on kar'eh hamita, on these legs of your bed. Says the Mishnah, it is kasher. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it is not kasher. Rabbi Yehuda omer, im ena yechola la'amod bifnei atzmah psula. If the schach is only leaning on kar'eh hamita, on the legs of your bed, and it doesn't stand on its own without kar'eh hamita, without the bedposts being there, then your sukkah is pasul. Which is very strange, because so far, in all the discussions that we have had, in 20 dapim of the Gemara, we have learned that schach has to be kasher. Schach has to be not mekabel tum'ah, cannot be susceptible to tum'ah. Walls of sukkah could be from anything you want. Could be from cement, could be from wood, could be from iron, could be from anything. So why is it that all of a sudden I care about what my schach is sitting on? That's the part of the walls of this sukkah. So why do I care about that is the question, attempting to understand the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Hence the Gemara asks this question. My Ta'amad Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason? Why does Rabbi Yehuda hold that Hasomech Sukkato bekar'eh hamita is pasul? And the Gemara says, Vachloket Amoraim. Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Abba bar Memal disagreed about the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda. Chad Amar, one of them says, Mipene she'en la hakeva. Because it doesn't constitute a sukkah that's kavua. We all remember, right? The Gemara earlier on, Daf Zayin, the Gemara early on, and Daf Bet, that's Rabbi Yehuda's shita is sukkah dirat keva ba'inan. Remember that? Right? Dirat arai, if it's a temporary structure, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is not good. It has to be dirat keva. Now, part of dirat keva is, if I have this sukkah on a bed, so I pick up my bed and I move it because my wife is not happy, so the sukkah moved, right? That's not keva. So if the only thing that keeps my sukkah together is the bedposts, the bed is not kavua. Bed today is here, tomorrow is there, you can move it around. So therefore, says the Gemara, that's one understanding in Rabbi Yehuda, why when you lean your schach on bedposts, it's going to be pasul, because it's not dirat keva. It's not kavua. It's considered too temporary. V'chad amar, the other one says, mipene shma'amidah bedavar hamekabel tuma, because you are erecting this schach, you're upholding it with a davar hamekabel tumah. Now, this is a new introduction to us, because up until now we only knew that the schach itself cannot be made out of something that's mekabel tumah, right? Now, the Gemara is telling us that not only that, but even if what holds your schach up, the only reason that my schach is up there is because of a davar hamekabel tumah, that also will be considered a psul. That will also constitute a problem for the schach, even though that the entire schach is good, but it's held up only with a davar hamekabel tumah, it's a problem. Now, obviously, as this unfolds, we're going to talk about all of this concepts as they pertain to our sukkahs. You know, when I have one of these canvas sukkahs, the structure is a metal frame. How does that affect my sukkah? Because what holds up the schach is the metal frame. But then I have like a little beam on top of the metal, and then the schach is sitting on that. But the wood beam would not stand without the metal beam. So eventually, it's davar hamekabel tumah. Is that we paskin that's good? But Chazon Ish is machmir. If you actually see those who are pious enough to have a sukkah, what they call a sukkah of Chazon Ish, there is no nail in the sukkah. Everything fits into each other, and the beams that are horizontal are sitting on the beams that are vertical, and everything is holding itself without any nails, any metal, right? That's like taking this concept on a steroids, but according to Maran Shulchan Aruch, only the Ma'amid will be fine. We'll get to discuss all of these things, but this is where it starts. That not only you have to have a schach that's not mekabel tumah, but the schach also has to be held up by something that is also not mekabel tumah. So therefore, if you have karei hamita are a kli. A kli is mekabel tumah. So I don't care about the fact that your walls are karei hamita, right? You could knock yourself out. You want to have cement, whatever you want you could have as the walls. As long as they're not holding up as a davar hamekabel tumah, your schach. This, by the way, also is the reason of the entire debate about bamboo schachs, right? It's not nowadays because people sleep on them that the whole thing would be mekabel tumah, but it's mainly because, well, what holds the bamboo pieces together? Because if I have this thin bamboos, and I lay them on top of my schach, and a little wind comes, and bye-bye to the entire piece of bamboo, so then it's not omed beruach mitzuya. If my schach can't withstand a normal wind, then the whole schach is pasul. It has to be standing with a normal wind. So a bamboo schach, a bamboo mat, only stands the regular wind because they're tied together. Now, what ties them together? So if you have something that's mekabel tumah, then forget about the whole thing becoming mekabel tumah. Even if they are not going to become mekabel tumah, but the thing that is holding your schach down is mekabel tumah. Hence the question on the ones that they have in Lowe's and Home Depot that are attached together with a metal piece. Now, if you tell me that the whole thing becomes mekabel tumah because of the metal piece, so then the whole thing is pasul, nothing to talk about. But even if you don't say that, but what holds them together is what? The metal piece, that's for sure. So how in the world that would be kasher? Because the ma'amid, what holds up your schach up there is the string of the metal that sews up the entire bamboo mat together. So hence it should be pasul, right? That's why sometimes your rabbi would say, depending on what your moreh horah holds about those types of schach, everyone should speak to their local Orthodox moreh horah. But sometimes they will tell you, put a 2x4 on top of it, right? Because the 2x4 now is holding it, and you don't no longer need the metal necessarily over there. But again, this is a complex thing. As this unfolds, we will have perhaps pieces of halacha talking about all of these details, but it all starts from our Mishnah over here. So we have Abaye, we have the Gemara actually talking about this machloket Amoraim of Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Abba bar Mebal what exactly the reason of Rabbi Yehuda is. Amar Abaye. Now Abaye says, Lo shanu ela samach, aval sichech al gav hamita keshera. Abaye says this is only when your schach is actually leaning and is held up literally by your bedposts. But if you make a frame above your bed, so you have the bed has walls, comes with walls, so you're going to sleep on the floor of your sukkah is your bed. The sides, the walls of your sukkah is the bedposts, right? It comes up nice, like a king's, but then the schach is not sitting on the bedposts. You made a frame with 4 poles and another 4 things going horizontally across. You laid your schach on top of it. You can move the bed from underneath it, and it stands, right? So that's kasher, because even though that my bed is not kavua, even though that my bed could be moved, but this schach structure is not part of the bed, that can stand there. So therefore, even if you say the reason of Rabbi Yehuda is because it's not dirat keva, this one will be fine. And of course, if you say the reason is mekabel tumah, it's going to be fine. So let's read this inside. Amar Abaye, 3 lines up. Lo shanu. We skipped the line. Thank you for that. Says the Gemara. So what's the difference between these two pshatim of the Gemara? Thank you for that. Says the Gemara. My benayu kegon shenaas shpudin shel barzel v'sichech alehem. The difference between these 2 mandamars in Shitat Rabbi Yehuda is if you bolted down some metal beams structure and then you put the schach on top of that. Well, if you say the reason of Rabbi Yehuda is because it's not, sukkah has to be dirat keva and the bedposts are not keva. This is keva. I bolted down some metal beams, nice, sturdy, into the cement ground, not moving at all. So that would be kasha. If you say the reason is because I'm holding up the sukkah, the schach with davar ha-mekabel tumah, so then here also is mekabel tumah. The metal beams are pasul, are mekabel tumah, so then your sukkah is going to be pasul as well. Leman da'amar lefi she'en la keva, harei yesh kan keva. Uman da'amar mipenesh ma'amida b'davar ha-mekabel tumah, says the Gemara, harei ma'amida b'davar ha-mekabel tumah. So that would be the nafkaminas. You see this machloket in Shitat Rabbi Yehuda is a very consequential machloket, because you could have many different scenarios in which, according to one of them, it will be kasha, according to one of them, it will be pasul. Again, our sukkahs, the canvas sukkahs that you buy from Sukkah Depot, right? That would be another example. You have a nice structure that you put together, all from metal. It's certainly kavua, not moving it anywhere, but it's from metal, right? So it could mean many different scenarios of nafkamina. So says Abaye, Lo shanu ela samach, aval sichech al gabe amita kshera. If you are not leaning your schach against the bedposts, but they are hovering on top of it with their own structure of a frame that holds up the schach, then it's going to be kasher. So you have the bed on the bottom, the walls are part of the bed, and then you have 4 poles with a schach on top of them, that it will be kasher. As long as the poles are made out of wood, they're kasher, you're good to go. My tama, why? Because however you slice this is going to be good. Leman damar lefishen la keva. If you say the reason is because it doesn't have keva, the bed is not kavua, you could take the bed away. The poles are staying there. My schach has to be kavua, because sukkah, for many times we've said this, sukkah means the schach. So my schach is kavua, the whole thing is considered dirat keva. So says the Gemara, leman da'amar she'en la keva, harei yesh kan keva, leman da'amar miperesh ma'amida b'davar ha'mekabel tumah, harei en ma'amida b'davar ha'mekabel tumah. And according to the Mandamar that holds, the problem of Rabbi Yehuda is because what holds up your schach is the bedposts that are mekabel tumah, that are susceptible to tumah. Over here, I'm not leaning my schach on the bedpost. I have my own frame that I made around the bed, which is separate from my bed, and that frame is all made out of wood. It's not mekabel tuma, so I'm good to go. Fine. So that's our Mishnah with the introduction of this new concept of schach not being held up with a davar hamekabel tuma on the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the next Mishnah, Sukkah ha-medublelet. A sukkah that's medublelet. We got to see what that means. Veshesilata meruba vechamata. And that has more shade than sun. Now that would be simple, right? So a sukkah that is medublelet, a sukkah that is silata meruba vechamata, has more shade than it has sun. Kashera, they're kasher. If your schach, your ceiling of sukkah is so thick, you have put layer upon layer upon layer, stacked up, mamash, a thick, nice schach that's as thick as the ceiling of your house, says the Mishnah, even though you can't see the stars from within, that means mamash, there's no holes there. At night, there's no artificial lights back in the time of Chazal, and still you can't see anything through the schach, still would be fine. It's kasher. So says the Gemara, my medublelet. When you tell me sukkah ha-medublelet, what does that mean? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav, sukkah aniyah. Rav says the first two sentences of the Mishnah are describing the same thing. Sukkah medublelet, it comes from the language of dal. It's poor. It has very minimal schach, barely making it, that is silata meruba mechamata, that it has more shade than sun, because it has patches of open air, obviously less than 3 tfachim each, right? Because as soon as you hit 3 tfachim of air, the whole sukkah is invalid, right? We've spoken about that before. If you have one strip of 3 tfachim of air, no schach, the whole sukkah is gone. So you have patches of open, but it's not 3 tfachim, and it's a poor badbach schach, right? It's not a nice schach. So that's what Rav says. According to Rav, you have to know this, that the first sentence reads together, Sukkah medublelet, which means it's dal, it's poor, which means silata meruba vechamata still is more shade than it is open, than it is sun. That is kasher. The Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says no. Medublelet means what the Gemara is going to say in 2 lines. Mebulbelet, it means the order of the schach that you set up is a balagan. It's mixed up. You don't have one level schach. You have 2 layers of schach, separate from and different than each other. You have 1 layer of schach here, which is beam, open, like that. And then on top you have another layer separate from the bottom schach, that has also some beams over there, and now you want to have this sukkah seen as one schach. Is that kasher or not? That is sukkah medublelet, says Shmuel. Excuse me. Says the Gemara, the Shmuel Amar, kane ole ve kane yored. There's 1 beam on top, 1 beam on the bottom. 1 beam on top, 1 beam on the bottom. That's what medublelet means. So says the Gemara, Rav tani chadav, Shmuel tani tarti. Rav learns that the first sentence of our Mishnah is saying only 1 case, which reads, look at the words of the first line in the daf, the first line of the Mishnah, Sukkah ha-medublelet, says Rav, which means it is silata meruba mechamata. It is very poor schach, but still makes it to have more shade than sun. It's kasher. Shmuel says, no. That's 2 different scenarios. A sukkah medublelet, which is this interesting setup that you have 2 layers of schach compensating for one another. And then the second one is V'shesilata meruba mechamata, this poor schach, which has patches of open, but at the end of the day, there's more shade than sun. Both of the scenarios are kasher. So says the Gemara, Rav Tani Chada, Sukkah medublelet. Rav learns our Mishnah like this. Sukkah medublelet. My medublelet, what is medublelet? Is meduldelet. It comes from the language of dal. That means it's missing some schach, which means silata meruba mechamata. It's barely making it with the skin of its teeth to be more shade than sun. Kashera, that's kasher. The Shmuel Tani, Shmuel says, two different scenarios are discussed in the first line of the Mishnah. My medublelet, what is medublelet? Says Shmuel, mebulbelet. It's mixed up. It's two different layers. That's what we're talking about. V'tarti katani, and there are two scenarios. One is sukkah mebulbelet, which has two layers of schach. It's kasher. And also another scenario, the sukkah that has patches of open, but at the end of the day, subtotal more shade than sun. Both of those are kasher. Fine. Now we're going to go with the Shmuel's understanding. Amar Abaye, lo shanu elashen ben ze laze shloshat tfachim. The only way we could have this sukkah mebulbelet of Shmuel, so imagine to yourself you have a beam here on the lower level, and you have a beam here on the higher level. Then another beam here on the lower level. They compensate for each other. It's like a zigzag if you look at it from the edge. Says Abaye, these two layers have to be less than 3 tfachim apart, and we could all understand why that would be. Because of lavud, right? I could imagine halachically that this is dropped down to the same level because it's lavud, because it's less than 3 tfachim, is considered together already. We always have had that. So therefore, this is here, less than 3 tfachim away from each other, these two levels, and we halachically see the two levels be smashed together in the same level, and we will be good. That's Abaye. Rava says, no, it could be even as much apart as you want. It could be far apart from each other, and still would be kasher. That would leave a massive question mark in our minds, because we're not familiar with any concept that could work with that. Says the Gemara, Rava Amar. So that's Abaye. Abaye says, Lo shanu ela shem ben ze laze shlosha tfachim, aval yesh ben ze laze gimel tfachim. If you have 3 tfachim separating the two layers of schach, then psula, then you cannot combine them together and it will be pasul. Amar Rava says, no, afilu yesh ben ze laze shlosha tfachim, even if you do have shlosha tfachim, it is not lavud, still is kasher. Nami lo amar. So it says that also will be kasher. Lo amaran ela she'en begagot tefach, aval yesh begagot tefach keshera. Says Rava, if you have each one of these beams at least a tefach, the top ones we're talking about here, they are wide at least 1 tefach, then they're going to be kasher. If they are small beams, they're less than tefach each one of them, yeah, you're right. Then you need it to be within 3 tefachim of each other, the 2 layers. But if each one of these top beams are 1 tefach wide, then it could be far apart from each other and still is kasher. What's the concept? Says the Gemara. The Amridan Chavot Rami, because we say Chavot Rami. Now, these 2 words are unknown to most people who have not done Masechet Sukkah. Everyone knows lavud, everyone knows gud asik, gud achit, right? I don't know if it's familiar with that. Chavot Rami is a new one, right? For most people. So what's Chavot Rami? Chavot Rami is very similar to gud achit. Gud achit means if I have a mechitza like this, right? And it's dingling, is hanging in the air, we assume that this is coming down to the ground. We extend it in an imaginary extension of a halachic wall, and we pull it down all the way to the ground. That's gud achit. Chavot Rami is the same concept, just the mechitza is not standing vertically like this, is sitting horizontally like this. And we assume that this whole thing is here, whereas it's really here. Up here, we assume halachically that it's sitting on the bottom down there. That's what it means. Chavot means smash it down, put it down, and throw it down there where you need it to physically exist. So that's the concept of chavot. But that, Rava is saying, is only applicable when you have at least a tefach width. If you have a tefach wide beam, then it's applicable. So let's read this through where he knows this from. Says Rava, how do I know this? How do I know that that if he has a tefach, we do say this concept of chavot rami, and if he doesn't have one tefach width, we don't say chavot rami. We learned it in a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Korot habayit va'aliyah she'en alehem maziva. Again, this is another Mishnah in Ohalot. We already have established that Ohalot and Sukkah really go hand in hand because we're talking about tents, we're talking about ceilings. So in the halachot of ceiling of an ohel, when you have a kazait of corpse, you have a kazait of dead body beneath one of them, we talk about this schach, or a ceiling that's mebulbelet, that's two layers, right? So says the Mishnah, if you have beams of the ceiling of the house and the beams of the ceiling of the second floor, right? There is no maziva, there's no cement, there's no tar, it's just the beams, right? You're in construction, you're building, and the beams are corresponding together. Each beam on the bottom floor, the ceiling on the bottom floor, is exactly beneath the korah, the beam on the second floor. They're mamash aligned. So says the Mishnah, if they're aligned, tum'at tachat achad mehen, if you have a kazait of dead body under one of the beams of the bottom floor, tachteha tameh, ben tachtona le'en. So if you have it on the bottom floor, under one of the beams, only the area underneath that beam is tameh. On top of that beam is kasher, upstairs everything is kasher, mutarim lachem, no problem. If the dead piece of dead body is sitting on the floor of the second floor, underneath one of the beams of the top floor, it's the same thing. Only beneath that beam is going to be tameh, across the whole thing, across the whole beam, because the ohel on top of the met. But downstairs everything is good. The rest of the second floor, everything is good, right? And if it's sitting on top of the beam of the second floor, so from there until rakia, until shamayim, if you're if you're flying with a kite on top of it, you become tameh, right? Regardless of how high you are. But beneath it is kasher, right? The whole second floor and the first floor, they're good. Hayu elyonot keben hatachtonot. This is where it gets in touch with our sugya. If the top beams are not aligned with the bottom beams, but the bottom beam is here, and the top floor's beam is here, and each one of them is like this, right? They compensate for each other, but they're not aligned at all, of course. In that case, says the Mishnah in Ohalot, in halachot of Tum'ah v'Tahara, Tum'ah tachtehen tachat kulan tameh. If the Tum'ah is underneath it, the entire area underneath is tameh, because we assume that these are, brought together and is one solid schach for the whole thing, which any part of the schach that becomes beneath it tameh, the entire house becomes tameh, because of this whole concept of chabot rami, right? And there the Mishnah says, the Tanya Allah, says the Gemara, Let's just finish this before our time is up. Al gabel yonah kenegdah l'rakia tameh. Hayu ha'elyonot keben ha'tachtonot. If they are in this way that they're not aligned, but they're side by side in two different levels, tum'ah tachtehen tachat kulan tameh. Al gabehen, if the tum'ah is on top of them, kenegdah ad l'rakia tameh, up until shamayim is tameh, but bottom is all tahor. V'tani Allah, this is all Rava talking. So Rava says, on that we learned, the Braita says, we're talking about a case bizman sheyesh bahen tefach ubenen poteach tefach. We're talking about a case that the beams on top are a tefach wide. That's the only case. Aval en benen poteach tefach. But if you don't have that, then the tum'ah tachat achad behen tachteha tameh. Only beneath it is going to be tameh, and we don't say chavot rami to have the whole ceiling brought together, halachically speaking. Ve'al gabehen tahor. Alma, you see from here, says the Gemara, ki it be tefach amrinan chavot rami. Only when he has a tefach width, we say chavot rami. Vechilet bah tefach lo amrinan chavot rami. If he doesn't have a tefach, we don't say the concept of chavot rami. Shema mina. You learn it from here. The Gemara says, and this is how we end it. It's almost like a two dots, but we have a challenge that the Gemara is going to bring on this. Bezat Hashem, we'll see this in the next shiur.